Dr. Hansu opened his eyes to the sound of thunder. His body was broken. Every bone ached, every muscle screamed in pain. The crash had been violent and sudden. One moment he was checking the navigation systems of his research vessel, and the next moment everything was falling, spinning, burning. Now he lay on his back in what seemed like wet dirt, with strange plants hanging above his face like curious monsters. He tried to move his head and winced. Pain shot through his neck like lightning. Slowly, very slowly, he pushed himself up on his elbows. The jungle around him was like nothing he had ever seen before. The trees were enormous, with bark that glowed faintly blue in the shadows. The plants were thick and heavy, blocking out most of the sky. Everything smelled wet and ancient, like the earth itself was very old and very tired. Hansu was a scientist. He had studied many worlds. He had read many books about survival. But reading about survival was different from living it. His research vessel had crashed on Vex Krull Prime, a planet known to be home to one of the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The Vexakrali were apex predators. They were huge, with teeth like swords and claws like daggers. They hunted everything that moved. And now Hansu was on their planet, alone, with no one to help him. He sat up carefully and looked around. The wreckage of his ship was scattered across the jungle floor. Pieces of metal were twisted like toys. Wires hung from the broken hull. The emergency beacon was still working. He could see its small red light blinking in the darkness. But the signal was weak. It would take weeks, maybe months, before anyone found him. If anyone found him at all. Hansu decided he needed to find shelter. The sun was getting lower in the sky and night was coming. On Vex Krull Prime, night was dangerous. That was when the predators hunted. He gathered some supplies from the broken ship, a water bottle, some dried food, an emergency blanket that glowed red. He made a small camp about 50 meters from the wreckage, under a large tree with thick branches that could hide him from the sky. As darkness fell, the jungle came alive with sounds. There were roars and clicks and strange musical notes that made Hansu's skin feel cold. He sat very still, listening. He did not make any noise. He did not move. His training told him that movement attracts attention, and attention on this world usually meant death. Then he saw them. At first, they were just shadows between the trees. But as Hansu's eyes grew used to the dark, he could see their shapes more clearly. They were Vex Krali. They were young, much smaller than the adults he had read about, but still terrifyingly large. They were at least 7 feet tall, with long arms and legs that bent in strange ways. Their skin was dark green and covered with patterns that looked like scales. Their eyes glowed yellow in the darkness, and those eyes were looking directly at him. Hansu's heart began to beat very fast. He had read about this moment in every survival manual. When an apex predator sees you, do not run. Do not scream. Do not show fear. Instead, stay quiet and still. Make yourself look small and harmless. But it was hard to look harmless when there were 5 young predators circling your camp. The largest one, a female with a scar across her face, came closer. She was curious. Hansu could see it in the way she moved. She was not attacking. She was studying him, the same way Hansu studied animals in his work. The other cubs, for they were cubs, he realized, not fully grown adults, followed her lead. They moved slowly, carefully, like they were trying to understand what this strange creature was. Hansu did not move. He barely breathed. He kept his eyes on the female, not showing fear, but not showing aggression either. This moment felt like it lasted forever. The cubs got closer and closer. He could smell them now, a thick animal smell mixed with something like copper. He could hear them breathing. He could see every detail of their long teeth. Then suddenly, the largest cub made a low, growling sound. The others answered with similar sounds. It was as if they were talking to each other. Hansu understood from his studies that this might be their way of communication. They were deciding whether he was food or danger or something else entirely. The female tilted her head, studying him. Her yellow eyes looked directly into his human eyes. In that moment, something strange happened. Something passed between them. It was not understanding exactly, but it was something like recognition. She was not looking at food. She was looking at a creature, just like her, trying to survive. She turned away and left. The other cubs followed her, disappearing back into the darkness of the jungle as quickly as they had come. Hansu let out a long breath that he did not know he had been holding. His hands were shaking. His clothes were soaked with sweat despite the cool night air. He sat in his camp all night, watching the darkness, waiting for them to return. They did not come back, but he could hear them in the distance, calling to each other with those strange, growling sounds. They were keeping watch over him, he realized. Perhaps they were curious. Perhaps they wanted to see what he would do. Or perhaps they were just waiting to see if he was worth eating. As the night slowly turned to gray morning, Hansu understood something important. He had crashed on a world that wanted to kill him, but he had also encountered creatures that had decided, at least for now, to let him live. It was not safety, it was not peace, but it was a chance. And on Vexcrawl Prime, a chance was everything. The sun rose slowly over the jungle, painting everything in shades of red and gold. Hansu was still alive. He had survived one night on the most dangerous planet in the known world. He looked out at the jungle and made himself a promise. He would learn how to survive here. He would learn the rules of this world, and he would find a way to live alongside the creatures that had decided he was worth watching instead of eating. He did not know that his true journey was only just beginning. He did not know that 5 curious cubs, watching from the shadows, would soon teach their entire species a lesson about what true strength really meant. He did not know that a simple human from a distant world would become the teacher of an alien civilization. But on that morning, covered in dirt and pain and fear, Hansu made his first decision as a survivor of Vexcrawl Prime. He would wake up tomorrow. He would do it again, and he would keep doing it, one day at a time, until he found a way to make peace with this harsh and beautiful world that had captured him. The morning sun was hot on Hansu's skin, but it was the pain that woke him. Every part of his body hurt. His legs were sore from sitting all night in one position. His back felt like someone had broken it and then tried to put it back together in the wrong way. His shoulders felt like they were made of stone. This was what happens when a human body from a low-gravity world suddenly finds itself on a high-gravity planet. The weight of the world itself was pressing down on him, making everything hurt. Hansu sat up slowly and looked at his hands. They were shaking. Not from fear this time, but from exhaustion and pain. His muscles were burning. He had read about gravity sickness in the survival manuals, but reading about something was very different from feeling it. Every breath hurt, every movement hurt, even sitting still hurt. He needed to move, not because he wanted to, but because if he did not move, his muscles would become too stiff, and then he would not be able to move at all. He had learned this from his training. Movement, even when it was painful, was better than staying still. Movement kept the body alive. Movement kept hope alive. Hansu stood up slowly, holding onto the tree for support. His legs almost collapsed beneath him. He took a step forward, then another. Each step felt like walking through water, heavy and difficult. But with each movement, the pain became slightly less sharp. It did not go away. It just became something he could manage. The jungle was peaceful in the morning light. The birds, if they could be called birds, were singing their strange musical notes. The sun was red and warm, very different from the sun of his home world. Hansu decided to move around his camp, to walk in small circles, to help his body adjust to this new gravity. He started slowly, taking careful steps, breathing deeply. Then, without really thinking about what he was doing, he began to stretch. His arms came up slowly, reaching above his head. The movement was painful, but it was also necessary. He could feel his shoulders opening, his chest opening. He held the stretch for a moment, then bent forward carefully, reaching toward his toes. His hamstrings screamed in protest, but he kept the stretch gentle. After so much sitting, his body needed this movement. His body was like a plant that had been in darkness too long, and now the light was calling it to grow again. Hansu continued his stretching routine. He had done this same routine every morning for 15 years. It was muscle memory, something his body knew how to do without his mind having to think about it. He stretched his legs, he stretched his neck, he bent to the side, feeling his ribs expand. With each stretch, his breathing became deeper. With each stretch, the pain became less about damage and more about awakening. What Hansu did not know was that he was being watched. The female cub from the previous night was back, and she had brought her friends. They were hidden in the thick plants about 30 meters away, their yellow eyes watching every movement the human made. The largest cub, whose name in the Vex Crowley language was something like Kira, was studying Hansu with intense focus. In Vex Crowley culture, stretching and physical preparation were sacred things. They were not simple exercises. They were warrior rituals. When a young Vexicrali prepared for battle or for the hunt, they would move their bodies slowly and deliberately, building their strength and power. This was how they became strong. This was how they became worthy of respect. And to Kira, watching from the shadows, this human was doing something very similar. She did not know that Hansu was just trying to stop his muscles from hurting. She did not know that this was a simple human exercise to maintain health. To her, it looked like the human was preparing for something important. He was disciplining his body. He was making himself ready for conflict. It was beautiful to watch, and it was powerful. Kira watched as Hansu stretched his arms above his head, creating a long line with his entire body. She watched as he bent forward and touched the ground, something her own body could not do easily because of how her spine was built. She watched as he twisted his torso, feeling for the tension in his muscles. Every movement was controlled. Every movement was careful. Every movement was strong. Without really understanding why, Kira began to imitate him. She stood up on her hind legs, something she did not usually do. She stretched her arms above her head, trying to copy the human's movement exactly. It felt strange. Her body was not built for these kinds of stretches. But there was something about the movement that felt right. It felt disciplined. It felt important. The other cubs, seeing what Kira was doing, began to imitate her. Soon there were 4 young Vex Crowley standing in the shadows, stretching their massive alien bodies, trying to copy every movement the human made. They did not understand what they were doing or why it mattered. They only knew that Kira was doing it, and that made it important. Hansu finished his stretching routine. He was breathing hard, and sweat was running down his face, but he felt better. His muscles felt more alive. His body felt more like it belonged to him again. He sat down on the ground and drank some water from his bottle. The water was warm from the heat, but it was still water and his body needed it. He did not see the young Vex Crowley, who dropped back down on all fours and disappeared into the jungle. He did not see Kira looking back at him one more time with something like respect in her yellow eyes. He did not know that she was already thinking about coming back the next morning, and the morning after that, to watch this strange human perform this mysterious ritual. Hansu looked at the sky and made a decision. He would wake up tomorrow morning and do his stretches again. It would help his body adjust to the gravity. It would help him stay healthy. It would help him stay alive. What he did not know was that this simple decision would change the entire future of the Vex Crawley species. That 5 young cubs, watching from the shadows, would learn something that would reshape their entire civilization. That a human's morning routine would become the foundation of a new culture. But for now, Hansu simply stretched his sore muscles, drank his warm water, and watched the red sun move slowly across the alien sky. He was alive. He was learning how to survive. And somewhere in the thick plants of the jungle, 5 young predators were dreaming about a strange new ritual that they did not yet understand, but already could not ignore. Tomorrow morning, they would be back. Tomorrow morning, they would watch again, and the world would begin to change, one stretch at a time. 3 weeks had passed since Hansu crashed on Vex Crawl Prime. 3 weeks of pain that slowly became less painful. 3 weeks of learning how to survive on a world that wanted him dead. 3 weeks of waking up each morning and stretching his body, not knowing that 5 pairs of yellow eyes watched every movement he made. The camp had changed during these 3 weeks. What had started as a small area under a tree had grown into something more organized. Hansu had built a shelter out of branches and pieces from his ship. He had created a water collection system using materials he found in the jungle. He had even managed to figure out which plants were safe to eat, though they tasted bitter and strange. Slowly, day by day, he was learning how to live on this hostile planet. Each morning, Hansu performed his stretching routine. It had become a ritual now, a way to start each day. He would wake before the sun rose, make sure nothing dangerous was close to his camp, and then stretch his body for 30 minutes. His body had adjusted better to the gravity now, and the pain had become almost bearable. The stretches had become not just physical exercise, but meditation. It was the one time each day when his mind was calm and his body was focused. And each morning, without fail, Kira came to watch. She was not alone anymore. She had brought her brothers, Dax and Ren, and 2 other cubs named June and Mina. They would arrive just as the sun was beginning to turn the sky from black to gray. They would hide in the plants, staying perfectly still, their yellow eyes following every movement Hansu made. They had stopped hiding their interest. They wanted to watch. They needed to watch. What had started as curiosity had become obsession. For young Vexacrali, there were only 2 important things in life: hunting and survival. But now Kira and her friends had found something else, something that made their hearts beat faster, something that made them feel like they were learning an important secret. Kira had begun trying to copy Hansu's movements on her own, even when the human was not stretching. She would find a clear space in the jungle and attempt to reproduce what she had seen. Her massive frame, built for hunting and killing, was not made for the flowing movements of human stretching. But she kept trying. Every day she became a little bit better at it. Every day she looked a little bit more like she understood what Hansu was doing. One morning, something changed. Kira was not hiding when Hansu started his stretches. She had walked to the edge of his camp, standing openly in the clearing. Hansu saw her immediately. His body went stiff. This was the most dangerous moment since he had crashed. A 7-foot-tall apex predator was standing less than 10 meters away, watching him. Every instinct Hansu had told him to run, but he remembered his training. Running from a predator only made them chase you. Instead, Hansu made a choice that surprised even himself. He continued stretching. He moved slowly, deliberately, his eyes still on Kira, but his body relaxed. He was showing her that he was not afraid. He was showing her in the only way he could that this ritual was important. He stretched his arms above his head, reaching toward the red sky. He bent forward, feeling the stretch in his hamstrings. He twisted his body, feeling his muscles come alive. And Kira watched. But she did not just watch this time. She began to move. She stood on her hind legs, her massive frame towering above Han-Su, and she began to copy his movements. It was clumsy and large, a predator mimicking the movements of prey, but it was unmistakable. She was learning. She was practicing. She was accepting this ritual as something important. The other cubs, seeing Kira come out of hiding, came out too. Soon there were 5 young Vex Krali standing in Han-Su's camp, moving their massive bodies in ways that nature never intended them to move. They were stretching. They were learning. They were becoming part of something new. Han-Su felt tears in his eyes, though he tried to hide them. In that moment, something miraculous was happening. A human and 5 young predators were sharing something together. It was not friendship exactly, because friendship required understanding that neither species had. But it was connection. It was the beginning of something that might become communication. It was the first step toward peace between 2 very different worlds. Word spread quickly through the young Vex Krali population. By the end of the week, there were 12 cubs coming to watch Han-Su's morning ritual. By the end of the month, there were more than 30. They came in waves, arriving before dawn, staying hidden in the shadows and plants, watching as the human stretched his body and prepared himself for another day of survival. Some of them tried to imitate him. Others just watched and learned. Some would watch for a few days and then disappear, deciding that this ritual was not for them. But most kept coming back. Morning after morning, they returned to witness this strange and powerful thing that the human was doing. Then, one morning, something unexpected happened. An elder Vex Krali came to the clearing. Her name was Aina, and she was respected throughout the young population as a warrior and a teacher. She was massive, even larger than Kira, with scars across her body that told stories of great hunts and great battles. She was dangerous in a way that the cubs could never be. She was ancient and powerful and wise. Aina did not come to hunt Han-Su. She came to watch. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her yellow eyes studying the human as he performed his stretches. She watched as Kira and the other cubs moved through their own versions of the ritual, trying to copy every movement. She said nothing. She did nothing. She simply watched and understood. When Han-Su finished his stretches, Aina approached him slowly. Han-Su's heart was beating so fast, he thought it might burst out of his chest. This was an adult predator. This was an opponent that would kill him in seconds if she decided to attack. But she did not attack. She moved to a clear space in the clearing and, to Han-Su's amazement, began to stretch. Aina's movements were more graceful than the cub's movements. She clearly understood that this was not a physical fight or a display of pure strength. She moved with discipline and control, her massive frame moving in ways that seemed almost elegant. She was a warrior, and she was treating the stretching ritual like a warrior's exercise. When she finished, she looked directly at Han-Su and made a low sound, a rumbling from deep in her chest. It was not threatening, it was something like respect. The other cubs answered with similar sounds, creating a harmony of approval that echoed through the jungle. Han-Su realized something in that moment. This was not just about survival anymore. This was about culture. This was about Vex Krali learning something new about themselves. This was about a species beginning to understand that strength could be built not just through violence, but through discipline and control. And it had all started with a human stretching his sore muscles on a morning when he just wanted to stop hurting. 2 months after Aina joined the morning stretching ritual, everything changed on Vexakral Prime. What had started as a secret ceremony, watched by 5 curious cubs, had transformed into a cultural movement. Every morning at dawn, hundreds of young Vex Krali gathered at Han-Su's camp. They came from villages across the jungle. They came from the mountains and the plains. They came because word had spread that there was something important to learn, something that their elders were beginning to accept and respect. The stretching ritual had been given a name in the Vex Krali language. When spoken, it sounded like a combination of growls and clicks, but it meant something close to warrior stance in human language. The elders had approved it. Some had even begun to join, though they were slower and more careful than the younger generations. They understood, in a way that only warriors could understand, that discipline and control were forms of strength. Hansu had stopped being surprised by all of this weeks ago. Now he just accepted his role as the teacher of a ritual he had never intended to create. Each morning he would stretch, and hundreds of Vex Crowley would mirror his movements. He had become, somehow, the most important teacher in their society. Not because he was strong or dangerous, but because he had shown them something they never knew they needed. But not everyone was happy about this change. Crack was an old warrior, one of the most respected fighters in all of Vex Crawl Prime. He had lived through many conflicts. He had killed many enemies. He had built his entire existence on the idea that strength meant power and violence. The idea that a human from another world could teach the Vex Crowley about becoming stronger through stretching and discipline seemed ridiculous to him. It seemed weak. It seemed like betrayal. One morning, as Hansu was finishing his stretches, Crack walked into the clearing. He was enormous, even larger than Aina, with muscles that looked like stone beneath his green skin. His eyes were not yellow like the other Vex Crowley, but a deep orange, and they burned with anger. When he moved, everything around him seemed to shake. The hundreds of young Vex Crowley who had gathered for the morning ritual immediately went silent. They recognized this presence. They recognized danger. Crack made a sound, a roar that echoed through the jungle, and the young Vex Crowley scattered like frightened birds. Within seconds, Hansu and Crack were alone in the clearing. This was what Hansu had always feared, but had somehow managed to avoid. This was the moment when a dangerous predator saw him as a threat. "You teach weakness," Crack said, his voice like boulders grinding together. The Vex Crowley language was not made for human sounds, but through some miracle, Hansu had learned enough to understand the basic meaning. "You teach our young that stretching makes them strong. This is lie. Strength comes from blood. Strength comes from victory. You are not warrior. You are not teacher. You are prey." Hansu had a choice to make. He could run. He could hide. He could try to explain or apologize. But something inside him knew that none of those things would work. Crack had already made up his mind. Crack believed that the only way to prove that the old way was better than the new way was to destroy the new way. And that meant destroying Hansu. So instead of running, Hansu stood up tall and extended his hand, offering to shake hands as humans did when they wanted to show respect. It was a gesture that made no sense to Crack. It was a gesture that Crack interpreted as mockery. He attacked. Crack moved with terrifying speed for something so large. His claws, each one as long as Hansu's hand, reached out to tear the human apart. But Hansu was ready. All those weeks of stretching had made his body more flexible, more aware, more able to move in ways that humans from high-gravity worlds usually could not. He twisted to the side, feeling Crack's claws whistle past his face so close he could feel the wind they created. Crack turned and attacked again, his strength incredible and his speed deceptive. Hansu dodged again and again. He was not trying to hurt Crack, he was trying to survive. He was trying to show, through movement and grace and control, that there was another way to be strong besides pure violence. Crack became frustrated. Every time he tried to kill Hansu, the human seemed to dance away. Every time he thought he had the human cornered, Hansu would move in a way that Crack did not expect. The old warrior was used to fighting other Vex Crowley, creatures built like him, creatures whose movements he could predict. But Hansu was different. Hansu was flexible and small and aware in ways that Crack was not. Finally, after several minutes of chasing and missing, Crack made a mistake. His massive frame, built for power and not grace, overextended during one of his attacks. His balance faltered. His massive body began to fall forward, out of control, and Hansu caught him. The human, small and fragile-looking compared to the enormous predator, actually caught the falling warrior and helped guide him safely to the ground. It was not a victory. It was not a defeat. It was something else entirely. It was respect. It was compassion. It was showing Crack that strength without wisdom was just violence. But wisdom combined with discipline could be something beautiful. Crack lay on the ground, shocked and confused. He had expected to die fighting a human. Instead, a human had saved him from his own overconfidence. Around the clearing, hidden in the plants, the young Vex Crowley, who had been watching the entire fight, made sounds of amazement. Aina stepped out from the shadows, her massive frame moving with the grace that Hansu had taught her through the stretching ritual. She looked down at Crack and then looked at Hansu. In her eyes, there was new understanding. The old warrior had been tested, and he had been found lacking, not because he was weak, but because he refused to adapt, because he refused to learn, because he refused to understand that true strength was not just about muscles and claws, but about discipline and wisdom and the ability to show mercy to an enemy. Crack stood up slowly. His orange eyes looked different now. The anger was still there, but so was something else. Shame, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. He looked at Hansu for a long moment, and then he did something that shocked everyone. He began to stretch. It was clumsy, and it was angry, but it was real. Crack was accepting the new way. He was accepting that a human from another world had something to teach him. And more importantly, he was accepting that strength was not what he had always thought it was. The young Vex Crowley emerged from the shadows and gathered again in the clearing. By the time the sun fully rose, there were not just hundreds of them, but thousands. They had heard about the battle. They had heard that even the fearsome Crack had accepted the warrior stance. And now they all wanted to learn. Hansu, exhausted and shaking from the battle, sat down on the ground. His body hurt even more than usual, but his heart was lighter than it had been in weeks. The ritual had survived its greatest challenge. The ritual had proven itself. And now, on Vexcrawl Prime, a new age was beginning. 6 months had passed since the fight with Crack. The entire world seemed different now, though to someone visiting from outside, little appeared to have changed. The jungle was still thick and dangerous. The red sun still rose each morning. The Vex Crowley still hunted and lived and built their society in the way they had done for thousands of years. But underneath everything, something fundamental had shifted. The warrior stance had become the foundation of Vexicrowley culture. Every morning, before the dawn fully arrived, thousands of Vex Crowley gathered across the planet to perform the ritual. It was not just something that cubs did anymore. Warriors performed it, elders performed it. Even the highest leaders of the Vex Crowley civilization performed it. What had started as a human's simple morning exercise had become sacred. It had become the way their entire species understood what strength really meant. Hansu no longer lived in a camp under a tree. His simple shelter had evolved into something much larger. The Vex Crowley had built structures around his living space to keep him safe and comfortable. They brought him food. They brought him water. They treated him not as a prisoner or a curiosity, but as a treasure. He was their teacher, and they protected him like a precious thing. In the village nearest to Hansu's home, a young female named Mi Sun had become obsessed with studying the movements of the warrior stance. She was an engineer by trade, someone who understood how buildings were constructed and how structures held their weight. One day, as she was practicing her stretches, she noticed something. The way Hansu taught the ritual involved bending and flexibility. The movements were not rigid. The movements were not forced. The movements flowed like water, finding the path of least resistance while still building strength. And she realized that buildings could be designed the same way. Mi-san began to experiment. She took the principles of the warrior stance and applied them to architecture. Instead of building rigid structures that resisted the natural forces of the world, she designed buildings that could bend and flex and adapt. Her first building, a small dwelling, survived the terrible earthquakes that regularly shook Vexcral Prime. Other buildings cracked and crumbled, but Mi-san's building stood firm because it did not try to resist the Earth's movement. It moved with it. Soon, other builders were learning from Mi-san. The architecture of the Vexacrali began to change. Buildings became more graceful. Cities became more flexible. The entire physical world that the Vexacrali had built started to reflect the principles of the warrior stance. Form followed the same discipline and wisdom that Hansu taught through stretching. In another village, a male named Junho had become a historian. He was fascinated by stories and records and the way that events shaped societies. When he heard about Hansu and the warrior stance, he became determined to document it. He interviewed the first cubs who had watched Hansu stretch. He talked to Aina about the moment she decided to join the ritual. He spoke to Crack about what had changed his mind when Hansu caught him during their battle. From all these stories, Junho created the first written account of the warrior stance. It was not just a simple record. It was a philosophical exploration of how one individual's discipline could reshape an entire civilization. It was a celebration of the moment when a species learned that strength could come from unexpected places, that wisdom could come from strange teachers, that change did not have to mean loss of identity. Junho's written account was copied and shared throughout Vexcral Prime. It became the most important text in their culture. Schools were created to teach it to young Vexcrali. Scholars spent their lives analyzing every word, finding new meaning in Hansu's simple stretches. What had started as a human trying to reduce his muscle pain had become the foundation of an entire philosophical system. Kira, Dax, and Ren, the first cubs to watch Hansu stretch, had grown into respected warriors and teachers. They trained the next generation of Vexcrali not just in the physical movements of the warrior stance, but in the spirit of it. They taught that discipline was a form of respect for yourself and others. They taught that accepting a new idea was a form of strength, not weakness. They taught that the greatest warriors were not the ones who killed the most, but the ones who understood themselves the most. But Hansu still missed his home world. He had been on Vexcral Prime for almost a year now. His distress signal had never been strong enough to reach far into space. No one was coming to rescue him. The rescue ship he had always imagined might arrive was never going to arrive. He was stuck here. And yet, increasingly, he was not sure he wanted to leave. He had friends here. He had purpose here. He had, in a strange and unexpected way, become part of something important. The cubs he had taught had become like children to him. The elders, even Crack, had become like colleagues. The entire society had welcomed him and honored him and made him part of their world. One night, Hansu sat outside his shelter and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, his home world. Somewhere out there were people who probably thought he was dead. But under the red alien sun of Vexcral Prime, he had found something he never expected to find. He had found home. Mi-san came to visit him that evening. She brought with her designs for a new building, a structure that incorporated both human principles and Vexacrali strength. It would be a school, she explained, a place where young Vexacrali could learn not just the warrior stance, but all the wisdom that Hansu could teach them. Junho arrived later, bringing new pages of his historical account. He was writing about how the warrior stance had spread beyond just physical exercise. It had become a way of thinking. It had become a way of being. The entire Vex Crawley civilization was being transformed by principles of discipline, flexibility, and respect. Aina came to visit as well, bringing news from across the planet. The warrior stance was being practiced by millions of Vex Crawley now. The transformation was not just happening in Hansu's village. It was happening everywhere. A species was learning to be stronger not through violence, but through wisdom and discipline and the willingness to learn from an unexpected teacher. Hansu looked at his friends, these alien creatures who had become family, and he made a decision. He would not leave Vexacral Prime. He would not wait for a rescue ship that was never coming. He would spend the rest of his life here, teaching and learning and helping his friends build a better civilization. He would become the bridge between worlds, the teacher who showed that strength could come from any direction, from any species, from any being willing to stretch themselves toward something greater. And every morning, for the rest of his life, he would wake before dawn and stretch his body, while thousands of alien predators gathered to watch, to learn, and to understand what true strength really meant.